Why do you have the authority to determine whether or not
Why do I have the authority to determine what I say? What kind of question is that?
Like, I'm not a free speech advocate, let's say. I'm a true speech advocate, that I believe that people should say what they believe to be true.
You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run. I think it'll do quite the contrary.
I'm just trying to work that out. I mean...
Ha, gotcha. Yeah, well, kindness is the excuse that social justice warriors use when they want to exercise control over what other people think and say.
And that was the only thing.
Can't you tell?
Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
No.
Pronoun. And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation. And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
You got in trouble for refusing to call trans men and women by their preferred personal pronouns.
No, that's not actually true. I got in trouble because I said I would not follow the compelled speech dictates of the federal and provincial government. I actually never got in trouble for not calling anyone anything.
You cited freedom of speech in that. Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on. And that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
ha, gotcha.
Do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Then
why were they here?
Well, how can I answer
Are their views in alignment with yours? At some point you have to realize.
That's a foolish question. Look, if you want to know what my views are...
I've watched all of your videos, yes.
Including...
Yes, I have.
Yes.
Then why would you ask such a question?
Because this is my interpretation of your videos.
Apparently,
all of the people who arranged the protest against you watched all of your videos.
It's like, do you want to disavow?
I have 150 videos on YouTube.
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Okay. So look, I will answer your question, okay? I've studied Nazism for a very long time, in 4 decades, and I understand it very well. And I can tell you that there's some awful people lurking in the corners, and they're ready to come out. And if the radical left keeps pushing the way
that sounds very much like a
they're
threat.
going to come.
That sounds very much like a threat.
That
sounds very much like a threat. Would you like to disavow the physical violence? Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence?
Yes.
So you wish that didn't happen, and you want to. And I'm going to post this online that you would like people to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I would like there to be no violence.
I'm a person of color, and I felt very accommodating here. I felt like my voice. Thank you very much.
I'm also Muslim, and I feel like this guy is the best.
You wanted to disavow, and this is the disavowal. I am not an advocate of violence. I'm speaking out the way I'm speaking out because I think this is a route to no violence.
Like, I'm not a free speech advocate, let's say. I'm a true speech advocate, which is to say that I believe that people should say what they believe to be true. I think that's your obligation. It's also your right, but it comes with an obligation. But I don't believe that true speech is possible without free speech, because you're just not very good at thinking. And so you have to stumble around when you're first formulating ideas and wander into territory that's not necessarily productive and manifest your biases. And in short, you have to be a fool. And the only way that you improve upon that performance is by, well, first of all, stumbling through it to begin with, and then second, by observing carefully what sort of reactions you're getting and having a dialogue around it so that you can start to sharpen up your ideas and improve their focus and find out where you've made a mistake and all of those things. So a lot of what's necessary with regards to thinking is the freedom to make mistakes, because what, are you going to do it right the first time? I don't think so.
Well, Professor Peterson, those who are asking for this use of alternate pronouns, they are saying it boils down to respecting their human rights. How do you respond to that?
I don't think it boils down to respecting their human rights. I think that it's an imposition on freedom of speech that's being implemented at a legislative level. I also think that if there was a naturally evolving solution to the linguistic problem that's being posed by a small fraction of the transgender community, that people would have already adopted it. We've never had a situation in the usage of English before that required legislation to produce a transformation in the manner in which people spoke. It's a very dangerous precedent. So it's one thing to tell people what they can't say. So, for example, we have legislation making it illegal to do such things as deny the Holocaust. It's a completely different thing to demand that people use certain words when they're formulating their own ideas. It's also absurd. Here's one thing that's happened that I don't believe the formulators of this legislation ever foresaw. In New York City, for example, there are now 31 protected gender identities, and I see no reason whatsoever why each of those gender identities can't demand the use of their own pronoun. And
you have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run. I think it'll do quite the contrary.
What? But you don't want us to have protections in the Human Rights Bill that will allow me to have employment, allow me to have housing security, allow me to have medical care. That's what this is about. It's not about infringing on your rights or making you learn a new fucking pronoun.
I don't think that's what it's about. What evidence do you have that attempting to transform the way that people use pronouns is going to produce a positive effect?
Because are you aware that there is a trans boy who himself in psychiatric care recently because he was continuously being misgendered by his care workers?
And that is my precise problem.
And there have been multiple recorded instances of trans people themselves because they are not being integrated into society. Singular they pronouns go all the way back to Shakespeare. It's not a new thing. If you refuse to let us integrate ourselves into society, you create alienation that results in we are in a suicide epidemic right now.
Man, you're almost impossible to talk to. You're so full of rhetoric that it's impossible to listen to you. I would be more than happy to listen to you.
Yeah, really.
I was devoid of rhetoric. And I don't really think I am a rhetorician. Just so you know that. And it's very hard to listen to you. I mean, it's very hard to attend to you
because
you rattle on with your ideological speech.
Well, except you've also called trans campaigners authoritarian. You're comparing them with, Chairman Mao, who under Mao, millions of people died.
Right.
I mean, there's no comparison between Mao and a trans activist, is there?
Why not?
Because trans activists aren't killing millions of people?
The philosophy that's guiding their utterances is the same philosophy.
You're saying that trans activists could lead to the deaths of millions of people?
I'm saying that the philosophy that drives their utterances is the same philosophy that already has driven us to the deaths of millions.
Okay, tell us how that philosophy is in any way comparable.
Sure, that's no problem. The first thing is that the philosophy presumes that group identity is paramount. That's the fundamental philosophy that drove the Soviet Union and Maoist China. And it's the fundamental philosophy of the left-wing activists. It's identity politics. It doesn't matter who you are as an individual, it matters who you are in terms of your group identity.
You're just saying these things, though, to provoke, aren't you? I mean, you are a provocateur.
I never say
You're like
anything.
the alt-right that you hate to be compared to. You want to stir things up.
I'm only a provocateur insofar as when I say what I believe to be true, it's provocative. I don't provoke. Jung said at one point that people don't think so much as thoughts appear in their head and they believe them. True thought is not only that the thoughts arise in your mind, it's that you look at the thought and then you critique it, right? You have to separate yourself from the thought and decide whether or not it's valuable. Well, so I would say, without free speech, there's no true thought. And then you might say, who the hell cares whether or not we think? And I think the answer to that is fairly straightforward. I mean, you might think it's so obvious that it doesn't need explanation, but there are very few things that are so obvious they don't need explanations. The reason you think is so that the world doesn't smack you as hard as it might. That's one of the things I tell students when I'm trying to teach them to write, because no one ever tells them why they should learn to write. Like, you learn to write so you can think, and you learn to think so that the world doesn't treat you any more harshly than it absolutely has to. And that's no joke. No joke to be articulate and to be able to think. There isn't anything that's more powerful than that. And you learn to think.
I have a calm, rational question.
Okay.
I won't get emotional with you. So who is this legislation harming? Who is
harming? Anybody who wants to use their own words.
So in what capacity? Be specific.
Look, it's important that people are able to use their own words.
Okay.
Because that's how we think. And if the government starts legislating how we think...
So if I wanted to call you she... I'm playing off of what you're saying. If I wanted to call you she and her and miss, because that's my freedom of speech, and if everyone just called you that all the time, and that was the only thing...
Can't you tell?
I think that you don't care because you've never had to face that.
Never had to face that. The Nazi presence at your protest. Are their views in alignment with yours?
And it's a common trend among people who have never had to face transgender-related discrimination that you think it's not a big deal because you don't have to deal with it.
I didn't say I didn't think it was a big deal. I said I didn't care if people called me that.
A trans person asked you, would you please refer to me by they and them pronouns? Would you refer to them by those pronouns?
Might depend on how they ask.
So no.
Why do you have the authority to determine whether or not...
refer to me.
Why do I have the authority to determine what I say? What kind of question is that?
Yeah, well, kindness is the excuse that social justice warriors use when they want to exercise control over what other people think and say. So, if we're bandying back and forth our differences in values, I would say that the highest possible value is truth. One of the concomitants is that we need stringent protection for freedom of speech so that we can utter the truths that we see fit. And I think that that's a value that's much higher than kindness, for example. I mean, there's lots of situations in life where kindness in the immediate present is not the appropriate way to react at all. So, for example, when you discipline children, you often hurt their feelings in the short term so that they can learn to behave properly in the medium to long term so that their lives go well. And so this automatic assumption that the people on the social justice warrior side of the equation are motivated only by kindness when they're also clearly motivated by power is something I find completely untenable.